and the Christian South. It involves the ability to secure food and infrastructure. The United States needs to be assisting the Nigerians in addressing their basic needs before we can ask them to join us with respect to what we perceive as our security needs. We need to understand that the NGOs that are oftentimes attacked by corporate America for taking on corporations, when it comes to countries like Nigeria, need to be listened to and partnered with. We need to develop a new matrix. We need to understand that when we as a country or when we as major companies partner with people who are viewed as corrupt and non-responsive, we become tainted by their lack of legitimacy. The argument of America for many years that I don't care if he's a son of a bitch as long as he's my son of a bitch, as was said by one of our presidents about Mr. Somoza in Central America, can no longer be the bellwether of our policy. And I'm not saying that about the present president of Nigeria. We simply don't know enough. What we do know is that he's from the North. If he's from the North, it tells you a few things. Number one, the Northerners are strong believers in a powerful central government because the North doesn't have the oil. And if you look at the principles of Nigerian federalism, which started with this concept of derivation that tied funding to the sources of income that worked well when Nigeria was an agrarian economy, it doesn't work well anymore when those revenues should be going to the Christian or animist South. So there's a tremendous tension. Also, one needs to understand that the most powerful group in Nigeria isn't just the president or his group around him, it is the army. The army is heavily dominated by Northerners. And the army and the danger in Nigeria is that the inability of the present president to move fast enough with his agenda, coupled with the deteriorating situation in respect to infrastructure, leads us to a situation which could go back to 1983, where the military decided it had to act. And military rule in Nigeria has never been a pretty thing or a good thing. So we need to understand that the situation in Nigeria, and if you read the interview with the president today, you'll see a man who says that he is dedicated to rule of law, in the process of which, by the way, he's overturned a slew of privatizations, frankly, without necessarily returning to due process. But he says he wants to root out corruption, and what he wants to do is he wants to continue this policy called NEEDS, which is a policy dedicated at addressing many of these infrastructure concerns. Unfortunately, he is the Minister of Energy. Energy goes through the presidency, as I've said about the resource curse. This is a tragedy for Nigeria. It is a tragedy because Nigeria needs decisions to be made quickly, and they're not being made. Critical Nigerian ambassadors have not been appointed. A tremendous amount is sitting in Abuja and not moving because of this inability, this very heavy focus on centralization that has taken place. And the next 6 months are going to be make or break months in terms of deciding where Nigeria is going. And let me tell you, when you see where the oil price is and we start talking about Venezuela, you understand how serious these issues are for the United States and how important it is for us to engage proactively on issues that are relevant to the Nigerians. How important it is for us to get off our agenda and get onto their agenda. And let's take a minute and talk about Venezuela, and then we can compare and contrast. I don't have to tell you that Venezuela is a very different story. Venezuela was always considered to be an exceptional democracy in Venezuela. Venezuela had and continues to have a vibrant civil society, a vibrant press. And we need to understand, when we try to deal with the hostility of Mr. Chavez, that our government was involved in a coup against him. Let's all understand, this man is not our enemy because he wants to be our enemy. He is our enemy because we threw him out of office and we radicalized him. That's number one. The United States is not necessarily the victim in this piece. Number two, this man is not Joe Stalin. He just did something that no Russian leader and very few other leaders in autocracies would do. He just lost a referendum. That was a big deal. Of course, after he lost the referendum, he went on to nationalize the very industries he said he wouldn't. But he did, in fact, lose the referendum. And now we're getting to the very interesting point. I would argue that with all of the successes we read about Mr. Chavez, with the success he's had in Ecuador, with the success he's had in Bolivia, I would argue his flag is not half as high as you may believe. But I'm going to tell you what Mr. Chavez needs. Mr. Chavez needs George Bush. For Mr. Chavez to maintain his legitimacy, he's got to pick a fight with Mr. Bush that's going to be serious. And that's why everybody needs to keep their eye on this issue involving the FARC. There are two major issues that could come up in U.S.-Venezuelan relations over the next few months. One is the issue of the FARC and whether or not we're going to label Venezuela as a state which supports terrorism. The second is a decision by Chavez to go nuclear. Those are the two things that can come up that, if we handle them wrong, could set us back tremendously in respect to trying to beat the present incarnation of resource nationalism. Resource nationalism is, in my view, and it has been historically, it is a short-term phenomenon. Unfortunately, I am old enough to remember the last few stages of resource nationalism. In 1975, we had the new international economic order. Just after OPEC doubled or tripled prices, developing countries decided they were going to establish an entirely new benchmark in respect to the ownership of resources. As you know, some years later, commodity prices crashed, and we had, in some of the most radical countries, an opening. In fact, in Venezuela, we had an opening. We had a major opening for hydrocarbons in the last few years of the last century. What happened, and what continues to happen, is that we continue to allow the price of oil to be manipulated by OPEC. We continue to fail to shine a light on OPEC's conduct. And we allow ourselves in this situation where we don't begin to see resource nationalism as part of an established historic pattern. We begin to start viewing it as a resource war. Well, the truth of the matter is, and if we play our cards right, I believe it will be demonstrated, both in Venezuela and in Bolivia, that countries at the apogee of pricing begin to understand that without the proper international partnership, particularly on technology, they're not going to make it. Investment in Venezuela is down significantly after we've had, in 2006 and 2007, essentially seizures of oil activities, seizures of investment, forced attempts to place foreign companies in mixed corporations.